You are listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. I'm Kyle Bryan.
And I'm Sean Baumstark. Together, we're navigating life with disability.
Sean and I were both diagnosed with a rare, debilitating, life-shortening disease that has affected our physical abilities and causes us to live with urgency. We are constantly looking for the next challenge, not only in spite of our disease, but because of it.
We are two dudes who constantly challenge our own abilities, and we invite you to do the same.
Hi, it's Kyle and Sean. We're excited to bring you a series of interviews focused on Rare Disease Day, which is coming up on February 28th.
On February 15th, we have Nicole Boyce, the CEO of Global Genes, on the show. On February 20th, we have Max Bronstein, Chief Advocacy and Science Policy Officer at the Everylife Foundation for Rare Disease.
On February 22nd, we have Paul Melmeyer, Associate Director of Public Policy at the National Organization for Rare Disorders. And on February 27th, we have our very own Ron Bartek, President and co-founder of the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance.
Now, on with the show. Today we're joined by Max Bronstein. Max is the Chief Advocacy and Science Policy Officer at the Everylife Foundation for Rare Diseases. He leads the foundation's policy initiatives relating to the Open Act to encourage repurposing for rare diseases and to enhance newborn screening. In addition, Max works on regulatory and science policy issues with recent publications in Nature and the New England Journal of Medicine on topics like patient engagement in drug development and enabling expanded access to experimental medicines. Max, thank you for joining on the phone today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself personally to get the conversation started today? What gets you out of bed every day?
Sure. I have the privilege to work with some of the most amazing patients and thought leaders in the rare disease world. When you get to meet some of the moms of kids or the dads or the patients themselves and hear kind of about what the struggle is like to have to live with a rare disease, and then as if that wasn't enough to have to go out into the world, constantly explain what your disease is to people because they've never heard of it, and then try to convince whether it's an insurance company or a member of Congress or a company that they should be investing in you because you're a patient and you're a person and your life matters. It's an incredibly challenging field to be working in, but also very rewarding one.
Awesome. So, Max, you represent the Everylife Foundation for Rare Diseases. Can you tell us a little bit about the foundation and maybe the mission and vision of the foundation?
Happy to do that. So our foundation was really started to kickstart and drive innovation in the country for rare disease patients. I think you guys probably know, and many of your listeners know, we have a big innovation gap in this country when it comes to rare disease therapies. So 7,000 treatments and only roughly 300 treatments on the market for those diseases. So we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done if we ever want to get to the point where we have one treatment for all those diseases or even multiple treatments for those diseases. And that's what our foundation is set up and designed to do. And the way we actually do that is by engaging on public policy issues and working on regulatory issues. So for me, what that means is going to Capitol Hill, going to Congress, going to the White House, going to the NIH, talking with folks at FDA, and really, looking at what's going on broadly in the system, whether it be policy initiatives coming out of Congress or regulations at FDA, and thinking about, how can we improve the current system we have in this country, and how can we make sure that patients are not falling through the cracks of the system, but are having their voices heard in Congress or at the FDA, and ultimately making sure that their voice is included when big decisions are getting made in DC about policy issues or about how the FDA wants to approve and regulate therapies in the United States.
Max, can you tell me real quick, when you talk about your mission of engaging, whether it be Congress or whatever the outlets may be, how are ways that you and the Everylife Foundation consider a success in your mission? When do you say we're on the right track and you're seeing success in what you guys have set out to do?
Yeah, I mean, one of the sort of flagship things that we do is we convene Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill. This year, this is at the end of February, we're expecting about 300 patients to join us in Washington, D.C. So they get to participate in a full week of activities, but one of the most important ones, in my view, as someone who leads the policy and advocacy efforts, is they get to go and meet with their members of Congress, their representatives, their senators, and they're going to talk to them about what it's like to live with the rare disease, but more importantly, what their members can actually do to help them, to help get new treatments developed, to help improve the approval and regulatory process at the FDA. So, patients will go and they'll discuss specific pieces of legislation that we think could help rare disease patients. And then they urge their members to support it. And last year, when we did Rare Disease Week, we had patients going to Capitol Hill talking about something called the 21st Century Cures Act, which I think many of your listeners were probably familiar with, and I'm sure many actually advocated for that piece of legislation, which was signed into law by President Obama. That bill had billions in new funding for the National Institutes of Health, hundreds of millions in new funding for the FDA, and a host of other changes that we think could really improve drug review at FDA and help ensure that rare disease patients are getting treatments as quickly as possible. So, for us, that's an amazing moment in time. It was a huge victory for the rare disease community. And in fact, we had Max Schill, who is was 7 years old at the time. He's now 8, but he's been one of our hardest working advocates on behalf of Cures, and was there for the enrollment ceremony, was there with Speaker Ryan, and was there with President Obama when the bill was ultimately signed into law. So, not only getting a bill passed, but having a rare disease patient there with, key policy leaders, with the President of the United States, like, it doesn't get better than that.
He must be the young man I'm seeing in all the photos with these big wigs.
Yes, he's very photogenic.
That's exciting.
Awesome.
Well, it's definitely, as somebody that's a part of the rare disease community, and we all are in different degrees, but I was certainly excited, and like you, see that piece of legislation as a successful move in the right direction. So thank you for bringing that up.
So, Max, can you tell us about 21st Century Cures and what was accomplished by getting that passed? What's in there?
So the bill itself is actually about 1,000 pages, and I won't bore you guys with that, but I'll give you some of the high points. I mentioned that there was new funding in there for the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which is funds over $30 billion of medical research across the country. So extremely important in terms of funding basic biomedical research. Specifically, there is a certain amount of funding earmarked for the cancer moonshot, which was named for Joe Biden's son. So there'll be new funding for cancer research, which is very exciting at NIH. And then I'm hoping that some of the money will also end up going specifically to rare disease programs as well. but that remains to be seen. So now that the bill has actually been signed into law, the next piece of it is making sure that it's actually implemented. So a lot of people think when a bill gets signed, it's over and done with, but actually that's actually just kind of the first big step, where now you have to make sure that the agencies actually receive the funding that Congress promised them, and then go out and ensure that the funding is being used properly and that the agencies have the resources they need to actually comply with the new rules that were put into place. So at the FDA, they'll receive new funding for drug review. The FDA is one of the most underfunded agencies in the federal government, given the magnitude of their mission, which is to regulate a quarter of the U.S. economy. So bringing new funding to FDA is really critical for improving drug review there. And then on top of that, there were certain salary caps that were put in place at FDA, which have now been removed. And the reason that's important is because we think it'll be very helpful in terms of recruiting reviewers that have deeper expertise in the rare disease fields, so that when new therapies come across the FDA's desk, they'll have people there who have deeper expertise in rare diseases and will be able to give those products the most thorough review possible. So that's just a couple of the things that are in there. There's a lot more items that I could talk about, but those are two of the most important highlights, we think.
That's awesome. That sounds like a lot of good stuff that's going to impact rare disease. Is there anything else? What else should we be looking at other than, just the implementation of the 21st century cures? What else is on the horizon that we should be looking at as far as legislation?
Yeah, with a new president, it's going to be a very, very busy year for healthcare. So I think everyone knows and has been talking about healthcare reform is already very hot. I think that's a debate that is likely gonna really heat up over the next month, but it will likely continue for a year or longer. So that that the healthcare debate is not going away. We're going to continue to see debate and discussion around drug pricing. It's another very hot issue right now. So, I would expect that to continue. The other major priority that the Everylife Foundation is spearheading is something called the Open Act, which we've actually received endorsements from almost 170 patient orgs on behalf of this legislation. But what this bill actually would do is create an incentive to really get companies more engaged in the rare disease space by taking drugs that have already been developed and then repurposing them for a rare disease indication. So it's basically a way of getting new treatments to patients as quickly as possible, because you're taking things that have already been developed and then seeing if they work for rare disease indications. It's the fastest way that we know of to get therapies to patients. It's basically a way of supercharging the biopharmaceutical industry and really speeding up the process, so that patients, the vast majority of rare disease patients who don't yet have a treatment, will have some hope of getting one in the near future. So stay tuned for more on that. That's going to be something that we're coordinating, and we're looking for other patient groups who are interested in working with us on the bill, and certainly individual advocates are welcome as well to contribute. So this will be something that we'll be talking a lot about during Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill.
Great. Awesome.
That was actually going to be my next question with this particular podcast, being centered around Rare Disease Day, which is just around the corner. Besides that Open Act, and you mentioned last year a big focus for Rare Disease Week and those patients involved was talking about 21st century cures. What is on your agenda this particular year? In just a couple of weeks here, what is it you and your organization and the patients you're connected with, what's your focus when you engage in your congressman or women, those leaders that are helping drive legislation?
Yeah, So the Open Act will absolutely be one of the topics that we hope people will choose to talk about on Capitol Hill. In addition to that, we also convened the Rare Disease Congressional Caucus, which is basically a group of members of Congress who have expressed interest in sort of supporting rare disease issues and helping create a platform to discuss those issues in Congress. So because this is the start of a new Congress, we need to rebuild that caucus and get new folks from the House and new folks from the Senate to join. So that will certainly be an area that we hope advocates, when they get to meet with their legislators face to face, they'll ask them to join up the caucus and show their support for rare disease patients. So on top of that, there's going to be a lot of discussion about what in DC is called appropriations, and all that means is how the government is actually going to fund the agencies for the current fiscal year. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now with a new Congress and a new president about what a funding level is going to look like at the end of the day for NIH, for FDA, for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, for all of these critical agencies that do work on behalf of rare disease patients. So we're going to be there pushing members to provide the highest levels that they can in support and funding for the agencies that are funding rare disease research or working on rare disease drug approval and review. So we've got a lot to talk about on Capitol Hill. Basically, it's gonna be a crazy week.
Exciting.
Awesome. So Sean and I have a disease that you may know of. It's called Friedreich's ataxia, and our disease has 5,000, roughly an estimated 5,000 people in the U.S. That's not very many people. But the idea, obviously, with the rare disease community is when we all come together, we have a lot of numbers, 30 million Americans, right? And so what effect have you seen either in the community or, on Capitol Hill too? What have you seen since Rare Disease Day has become a thing?
I mean, we can look back 20 years ago, which was a time when virtually no one was talking about rare diseases. There was very little research going on, and there were very few therapies on the market for patients with rare diseases. And clearly, we're coming into a time where it's very different. That's been turned on its head in a lot of ways. Rare diseases are of huge interest to folks in the biopharmaceutical industry. We just had JP Morgan here in San Francisco, and it was one of the most popular topics for folks who are interested in developing new therapies for patients. So, that's really exciting. We're coming into kind of a brave new world, and we have all of these existing drugs and biologics that are being developed and are in the pipeline. But on top of that, there's a whole new generation of potential therapies that could come from gene editing, gene therapy, and other sort of emerging technologies that go beyond just treatment. They actually have the potential to start curing some of these rare or common diseases. So all of these are things that actually have major policy implications too, especially when you're talking about new therapies that aren't necessarily well understood by the public, or certainly not as well understood by the FDA because of the fact that they're so novel. So this is part of the role of the rare disease community, is to learn about the latest treatments and the latest therapies, and then go out to the world, educate their friends and colleagues, but also educate policymakers, and certainly visit folks at the FDA when you can, to let them know that this is important to you all, and you want to make sure that they have all of the information that they need when it comes to thinking about rare disease therapies and medicines.
Awesome. So how do people who are listening right now, how do they get involved in the Rare Disease Day efforts? They can go to the Everylife Foundation website, everylifefoundation.org. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
And So how practically can people, get involved?
So if you follow us on Facebook or on Twitter, that's a great way to stay up to date on what the foundation is doing. We actually gave out about 100 travel stipends to help patients travel to DC for Rare Disease Week this year. So if folks are just learning about it, they can certainly think about applying in the future, or if they're in the DC area, all of our events are free and open to the public. So they should definitely register and attend if they're interested in being there. So that's one way to stay engaged with us. But periodically, when there's a critical issue coming up for a vote in Congress, whether it be in a committee or maybe on the House or Senate floor, we send out action alerts, which is kind of an all hands on deck moment for the rare disease community, where we ask people to write a letter to their member of Congress, or to get on the phone and call them and tell them to, take action or vote this way on a bill that's coming down the pike. And that's actually been one of the key ways that we've been able to influence policy in DC, is through our partnership and the support that we've been able to generate from the rare disease patient community and from all of the people there that really make our grassroots influence possible. So very appreciative and thankful for those who might be listening who have taken action in the past and advocated on behalf of rare disease issues.
Hey, Max, before we wrap up, I am curious if you don't mind sharing, whether it was 10, 15, 20, you don't look like you'd be any older than maybe 31. What got you involved in this particular space? Why is this your choice?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a longer story, but I started my career as a scientist, actually, and that started going even back to a younger age, just as a kid, always being extremely curious about the world, the natural world to some extent, but also my parents will probably tell you stories of me breaking apart various pieces of electronics to figure out what the hell was going on inside there. So, I guess I've always been kind of a science nerd. And then as I got older and sort of developed in more of an awareness about the world, science wasn't just this cool thing that allowed you to play video games and watch television, listen to music, but you could actually help a lot of people. You could save a lot of lives. You could create jobs with science. You could raise living standards for entire countries by applying science and technology. So that's kind of what got me really interested and devoted. And I later in my career, after spending some time as a scientist, realized that I could have a tremendous impact by working in the policy world. I mean, there were days in the policy world where I felt like in a week's worth of work in policy side of things, I could have more impact than in any other place. And certainly, when you get the opportunity to work on something like the 21st Century Cures Act that resulted in billions in new funding for medical research, like that's a great example of the level of impact that you can have with policy, and that's really possible. So, for me, I wanted to find a career path that allowed me to stay engaged in science and stay on top of kind of the latest breakthroughs, but more importantly, to make sure we're using that to actually help people and ensure that folks are getting treatments and ultimately working to help save lives. And there's nothing more rewarding than that.
That beautifully said. Thank you so much. I know we're just meeting, and even though I've heard about the Everylife Foundation and I know some of your efforts a couple of years ago, I will say on behalf of the patient population, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for choosing to be involved and for fighting for those lives. Like you mentioned, it isn't just it. Kyle and I say it every now and then on the podcast. This really is a matter of life and death. So thank you for what you and your foundation are doing to move the needle forward.
Absolutely. Our great pleasure. And we'll keep fighting. We'll keep it up. You can count on that.
All right. Thank you, Max. Everybody, that was Max Bronstein from the Everylife Foundation. And Max, we'll send everybody to your website, everylifefoundation.org. And I can't wait to see what comes out of Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill and just to follow that whole effort. Thanks so much once again for what you do. And thanks for being here on the podcast with us today.
Thank you, Max.
A great pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. To find this episode and links to some of the stuff we talked about today, find us online at twodisableddudes.com or subscribe on iTunes.
We'd like to hear from you and feature your feedback and questions on future podcasts. Be sure to visit us at twodisableddudes.com to find our contact info and connect on social media.
Special thanks to our audio producer, Jake Tompkins, who also composed the music.
We'll share a new podcast every other week. We hope you'll listen and share it with a friend. Until next time, keep living with urgency.